Good morning, everyone. I'm Linda Jacobson with PRB, and I'd like to welcome you all to the second day of the 2021 ACS Data Users Conference and to the first of two information-packed plenary sessions. Before I introduce this morning's speakers, I want to review some logistics for this session. So first, this session is being recorded, and it will be available for 90 days to conference registrants. Copies of this morning's presentation slides will be posted on this session page. At the bottom of the page, you will see those. Those will be posted later today, and then we will also be posting them after the conference in the ACS online community. Second, we will hold questions until all three speakers have given their presentations. On the right-hand side of the page where you are viewing this session, you will see two icons. The top icon is for a chat, and below that is an icon for Q&A. Just click on the Q&A icon to post all your questions for the speakers. You can provide your name or you can ask questions anonymously, but note that if we can't answer all questions during the session, Census Bureau staff will not be able to follow up with you afterwards if you don't provide your name. We also, as a courtesy, would like representatives of media organizations to be sure to put your name and the media organization you're with when you post your question. Please don't put questions for speakers in the chat. I know that we're all used to doing that in Zoom sessions, but the chat enables you only to communicate with other attendees in this session. It is not visible to the speakers. So they will not see anything you put in there, and I will not be reading questions from the chat. So if you have questions, please make sure to put them in the Q&A box. I will be reading the questions aloud to the panelists. And then finally, we encourage everyone to tweet during the conference using our conference hashtag ACSConf21. And Mark Mather is going to post that hashtag in the chat for anyone who didn't catch it or hasn't seen it. So we have a very distinguished panel here with us this morning, as described in their bios, that are available if you scroll down on the page for this session. So first, we are very privileged to have the acting director of the Census Bureau with us. And now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Ron Jarman to offer a welcome and some opening remarks. Dr. Jarman.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us here today in virtual Suitland for our 5th ACS Data Users Conference. So before we start, I really want to thank Linda and her team at the Population Reference Bureau, including Mark Mather and Lillian Kulduff, and the Census Bureau staff in the ACS office for putting together this event. Well, we've had an exciting year at the Census Bureau. We did a census and we had, like everybody else, a pandemic, which made doing a census harder and a few other challenges as well. But I think as you heard yesterday and more today and tomorrow, that we've done a lot of great stuff during this time. So first, let me talk real briefly about 2020 census. But one of the reasons I was excited to do this was to talk about something other than the 2020 census. So we took a snapshot of everyone living in the country last year on April 1st, and the number we came up with is 331,449,281, which is a 7.4% increase over where we were in 2010. But I was just out in the Pacific Northwest last week, where I'm from, visiting relatives, including my 101-year-old grandmother. And the population of the US on the date of her birth in 1920 was 106 million. So we've grown a lot in the lifetime of someone in my family. So that's kind of impressive. We got 2 out of 3 households responded on their own, mostly using our internet self-response tool, which did not have 1 second of downtime. And maybe you remember leading up to the census, there was lots of concerns that we were heading down a path towards something like a healthcare.gov kind of incident, but that did not happen. And because great kudos to our team and supporting contractors that did just excellent work making sure that our systems were ready for the census. In addition to internet self-response, though, the use of technology I think was pivotal in our success in completing the census during a really challenging time. So again, we used iPhones, our enumerators, and instead of writing down responses on paper forms and getting their assignments from their supervisors at a McDonald's or Starbucks in the morning on paper maps and whatnot. All of that was made electronic, and it doubled the productivity of our enumerators vis-a-vis where it was in 2010. And I think that was absolutely critical in getting the work done in time with the workforce that we were able to hire. So, one of the things that COVID brought about was some reluctance of folks to be out walking the streets and talking to their neighbors during a pandemic. So, I want to, express the gratitude towards the public for participating in the census, to our, hundreds of thousands of enumerators who went out there and pounded the pavement. And then, of course, to our team here at headquarters who worked tirelessly to make sure that we got this done. So, not only was COVID impactful for the decennial, but it was for the ACS and our other household surveys and for our business surveys as well. So huge number of challenges with sort of standard data collection, but also this explosion in the need from the public, from policymakers, from business leaders for up-to-date information on what was happening. And so our ability to make those adjustments during the year while we were doing the census and everything, I think was just a huge testament to the dedication, creativity, and hardworking, problem-solving, drive of our staff. So let me talk a little bit about, what we're calling internally as transformation. And so, and which is, our sort of code word for modernization. And I think, 2020 really shows how we are already going down this path. So, the Census Bureau has been an innovative organization for many decades. First, automated tabulation machines, computers, and really the development of the sample survey in the mid 20th century. But I think it's time for a new round of innovation, really taking advantage of new ways of doing our work, both of doing surveys differently, but also to take advantage of other data sources to produce the statistics that our data users have a growing need for, especially in terms of their granularity and in terms of their timeliness. And so with the pandemic rolling out, that was, we knew that folks needed to know how the pandemic, especially with what happened with the economy because of the pandemic, we needed to know what was happening to households across the country, what was happening to especially small businesses, which aren't surveyed with the same type of frequency that we do some of the larger businesses for current economic statistics. And so we introduced what we called the pulse surveys. So the small business pulse survey and the household pulse survey. And we put these surveys together with a host of other federal partners to get content put on them, and worked with the Office of Management and Budget to get them approved really quickly and stand them up and use some innovative ways of contacting respondents. And so, these were, instead of mailing, we used email, we used text messaging. So just huge sort of step forward in how to, put content out there in the field quickly to address a critical situation. So very proud of the work, both in the demographic and economic directorates that stood these up, along with support from our research methodology area and from our IT folks. And so maybe some of you have taken one of the pulse surveys. I'm still waiting, but hopefully I'll get a chance before we take them offline. So, one of the other things we did is we set up a COVID-19 data hub, which is put together in one place all the relevant information, sort of originally from the ACS and from County Business Patterns, that sort of gave in one place information related to the pandemic. And since that's grown and has a whole host of data, not just from the Census Bureau, but from other places as well. So, this all happened, because we needed to respond to something, but we were already kind of moving down this path of trying to modernize our approach to data collection, processing, and dissemination, what we call transformation. And one of the, we kind of had a schedule in mind to start engaging the staff in this. And, so we thought, well, do we do this during a decennial census? Do we do it during a pandemic? And the decision was to do it because the evidence was all over the place that the Census Bureau was innovating, right before our eyes. And so we're leading this transformation effort where we're engaging the entire Census Bureau and our stakeholders in conversations about what a 21st century statistical agency should look like. And so we've had a bunch of internal workshops. We're working on both venues like this, but also maybe on having a more of an evergreen partnership type program that would engage data users, data providers, especially from the private sector, on a more continual basis going forward. So look forward to how that goes along. And it's absolutely critical that we find ways to be responsive and take this sort of leadership role and providing good, useful statistics for decision makers out in the public. So just a couple quick things about the ACS. And I'll probably stop talking pretty soon so I can turn it over to Tori, and Donna. So the ACS is just an absolutely critical tool in not just for the Census Bureau but for the nation. And it is a benchmark tool that's used for a wide range of experts. And you're all here today to talk about that, but everything from transportation to housing to healthcare, the ACS has it. Supports over 300 federal government uses and just tons of others in businesses, economic development, local planning, and so on. And so it's just critical that we hear from you about what you need. But also that we start thinking about, as we move forward and think about new sources of data, how we can bring those together with ACS data to really sort of leverage and really grow the capabilities that we have from these data sources. And so, what we really want to hear is more about how we can start mashing up data from different sources and really coming up with new estimates that are more timely, more granular, and address issues that maybe we can't with just a single survey platform like the ACS or the CPS or whatever. So again, the hard work of the Census Bureau is built an excellent platform which to build off of, to make sure that we have excellent statistics on American households and the people going forward. So I just want to stop there and turn it over. Whether it's Tori or Donna, I don't remember. But thank you all for joining us this morning. Look forward to your feedback and your input. And thanks for joining us. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jarman. And I want to remind all of the participants to please start posting your questions in the live Q&A chat on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll be holding all the questions until both Tori and Donna have spoken, but please feel free to start posting your questions as we go along. So as Ron correctly guessed, our next speaker is Dr. Tori Velkoff, who is Associate Director for Demographic Programs and Chief Demographer at the Census Bureau. But many of you may know her from her previous leadership of the American Community Survey Office. So this morning, Dr. Velkoff will be providing an update on both 2020 census data products and several new innovative data products. So Dr. Velkoff.
Thank you, Linda. I'm really excited to be here to talk about the 2020 census data products, but also to talk about some of those new data products that Ron was discussing. So if you go to the next slide, please. I'm going to talk about our apportionment release, the redistricting data we're going to put out, the demographic and housing characteristics file, and the detailed demographic and housing characteristics file. And then I'll touch on some of those new data products that we did develop in response to COVID. So I'll talk a little bit more about the Household Pulse Survey, the Community Resilience Estimates, and the COVID-19 Data Hub. Next slide, please. So we released apportionment on April 26th. It was very exciting. We did a virtual press event, and you can see that Ron participated as well as I did, and so did Elle Fontenot and Karen Battle and Kristen Koslop, Michael Cook. Next slide, please. I'm sure that you are all aware of the results of the apportionment, but here they are. This is the apportionment of the U.S. House of Representatives based on the 2020 census. The number of seats for each state are shown. And then the states that are shaded in green are the states that gained seats, and the states that are shaded in purple are the states that lost seats. Overall, we had a shift in 7 seats between 13 states. So Oregon, Montana, Colorado, North Carolina, and Florida all gained 1 seat. Texas gained 2 seats. The states that lost a seat were Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, and California. This is historic for California. It's the first time that California has lost a seat since it started. And the other states that lost seats are really showing that pattern of population moving from the Midwest and Northeast to the South and the East. So no surprises here. Next slide. As Ron said, the resident population on 2020 was 331,449,281, an increase of 22.7 million or 7.4%. Puerto Rico's resident population came in just under 3.3 million. That was a decrease from 2010. And most of the decrease for Puerto Rico was a result of people leaving the island after Hurricanes Irma and Maria. Next slide. This graph shows the US resident population change by decade from 1920 through 2020, so the last 100 years. The bars represent the change, the growth in millions. So you can see in 1920, between 1920 and 1930, our population grew by 17.2 million. The number of the growth in the population has changed over the decades, and you can see that between 2010 and 2020, the population grew by 22.7%. The line represents the percent change. So you can see that between 1920 and 1930, the population grew by 16.2%. There was a decrease down to the 1930s, and then an increase in the 40s through the mid-60s with the baby boom, and then the population growth slowed again with an uptick in the 1990s, but then the population growth has slowed again. And you can see that the 7.4% change that we saw between 2010 and 2020 is one of the lowest that we've seen in the last 100 years. Next slide. So with any census, we're always concerned about the quality, and particularly for this census because of the impacts or the potential impacts that COVID could have had on the quality of the census. We did a couple of different things for our apportionment release. We know that one of the first things people do when they see the apportionment numbers is to compare them to our population estimates. So for apportionment day, we prepared a technical report that compared the apportionment numbers to the vintage 2020 population estimates. We also put out a blog. We also released a table of quality, operational quality metrics for each state. So next slide. This next slide just compares the vintage 2020 population estimates to the census counts. And you can see for the vast majority of states, shaded in gray, that their census count came within plus or minus 1% of their population population estimate. The states shaded in purple were states that came in higher than the population estimates, and the states shaded in dark purple came in at least 2% higher than the population estimate. So notably, New Jersey came in 4.5% higher than the population estimate, but also New York, Vermont, Rhode Island, Alabama, Puerto Rico, and Hawaii were higher than the population estimates. Arizona and DC came in lower than the population estimates. So this, Arizona's census count was 3.3% below the population estimate, and DC's census count was 3.2% below the census count. And North Carolina and South Carolina also had census counts that were lower than our pop estimates. But this map made us feel pretty good because really most of the states were very close to what we had estimated they would be. Next slide. Oh, of course, we put out a lot of stuff on apportionment day. We have a very interesting historical interactive tool that you can look at. There's a lot of detailed tables. We've got several videos about apportionment. Of course, we put a blog out. So if you haven't gone to our website, I suggest that you go. There's a lot of interesting material there. Next slide. Okay, so all of the data products following apportionment are grouped in my talk based on the disclosure avoidance approach that they're going to use. And all of the approaches will use disclosure avoidance methods that are based on differential privacy. So the first group of data sets I'm going to talk about are the redistricting file, the demographic and housing characteristics file, and our demographic profile. So next slide. Public Law 94-171 directs us to provide data to the governors and legislative leadership in each of the states for redistricting. And this product is really the first file that we will release that will include demographic and housing characteristics about detailed geographic areas. The subjects included in our PL file will be the voting age, race, Hispanic origin, occupancy status, and data on the group quarters population by the major GQ types. Geography for our PL release is the census block, and our release dates are on August 16th. We will release the data in a legacy format, and by September 30th of 2021, we will release the data in an easier to use format. Next slide. The next data product that we will be focusing on is the demographic and housing characteristic product, or DHC. And this file will include many of the demographic and housing tables that were previously included in Summary File 1 in prior decades. The subjects for the subjects in this file include single year of age, sex, race, Hispanic origin, household type, family type, relationship to householder. Some of these subjects will be iterated by the OMB race and ethnicity groups. We'll again put out data on the group quarters population, housing occupancy, and housing tenure. The geography varies, but many of the subjects will be available at the census block level. It's important to note that the DHC will not include tables that provide counts by detailed race, detailed Hispanic origin, tribes, or population counts by household and family types. These tables will be included in the detailed DHC. Next slide. Another product that we put out is the demographic profiles, and this really provides critical demographic and housing characteristics about local communities from selected DHC tables in a streamlined, easy-to-use format. And the subjects included in our demographic profile are 5-year age group, sex, race, Hispanic origin, household type, relationship to householder, again, group quarters population, and housing occupancy and housing tenure. And the geography for this will be at the place or minor civil division. Next slide. So the next set of data products that will be coming out are the detailed demographic and housing characteristics file. We're calling this the detailed DHC. And this is when we'll put out statistics for those detailed race and ethnicity groups, information on American Indian, Alaska Native tribes, and village populations. And this data product will also include those complex person household join tables not included in DHC. Next slide. And the final set of data products that we will be putting out, we'll probably put out a public use file. We'll put out a congressional district demographic and housing characteristics data product. And of course, we'll have special tabulations as we do with every census. Next slide. So I want to spend a little time talking about differential privacy. We have made substantial progress on the development of a disclosure avoidance system to support the 2020 census redistricting data product. We've released multiple privacy protected microdata files, or PPMFs as we say, and detailed summary metrics for the redistricting product for public review and comment. The most recent PPMF we released was on April 28th, so 2 days after apportionment. In this latest PPMF, we've increased and reallocated the privacy loss budget to improve the accuracy for a specific set of redistricting and Voting Rights Act metrics. And we're requesting feedback based on this new PPMF by May 28th of 2021, because we want that to help inform the Data Stewardship Executive Policy Committee as they make their decision on the final privacy loss budget for the redistricting data product in early June. Next. So just the way the census played out, we had to split our disclosure avoidance system into 2 stages. The first focusing on the redistricting data product because that had to come out first, and the second stage focusing on the demographic and housing characteristics file and the demographic profile. We're currently developing a timeline and plans for work on the DHC disclosure avoidance system. And we're also making progress on a disclosure avoidance system that will support the detailed demographic and housing characteristics products. And of course, we continue to do outreach with stakeholders and advisory groups, which really has helped us and informed the decisions that we make along the way. Next. So the process we're currently in is planning the disclosure avoidance work for the DHC. And right now we are refining accuracy targets for the DHC disclosure avoidance system. We will release PPMFs using the 2010 census data run through the new disclosure avoidance system to enable the public to assess the accuracy and privacy protection of the DHC tables. We are in the process of determining the timeline for the DHC PPMF review and also deciding how many PPMFs will be released. Again, we'll have, with the DHC PPMFs, we'll have a release and feedback loop that will follow a very similar cadence to our engagements with the PPMFs that we put out for the redistricting data product. And of course, the discussions about the number of PPMFs that we will release will be informed by the results of the public assessment of these initial PPMFs and our internal assessments of these PPMFs. Next. Okay, so now I want to switch and talk about the new data collections and estimates that we created because of the pandemic. Next slide. As Ron said, when the pandemic hit in March of 2020, we very quickly realized that we needed real-time, frequently released data products that could inform us about the rapid changes that were happening due to the pandemic, both on the economy and also to households. To that end, we launched 2 pulse surveys to produce rapid response data on the impacts of COVID on households and small businesses. We also expanded our existing modeling capabilities in small area estimation to produce new community resilience estimates. As Ron said, we also created a COVID-19 data hub. And then we had an initiative that I'm not really going to talk more about, but it's what we call the eHealth initiative. And this is where we are strategically reusing administrative records, including electronic health records, in order to improve the measurement and understanding of population health. And we're doing this through research and development of applications for use in production and linking multiple data sources to create new statistical data products. So kind of in line with what Ron was saying about our transformation. We don't currently have a website for this program, but it is coming soon, and this is the link for it when it comes out. Next slide. So let me talk a little bit more about the household pulse. Ron talked a little bit about it, but we coordinated it at the Census Bureau, and we really designed it so we could get out and quickly and efficiently collect data on the ways in which people's lives were being impacted by the pandemic. And since, if you remember back to March and April of last year, everything was changing so rapidly, we wanted a design that was able to quickly assess and report on critical issues as fast as possible. It is part of our experimental data series, and we thought of it as a proof of concept. The platform we used was Qualtrics. Part of the reason we used it was because it had a Census Bureau authority to operate, but we also used it because we could program the online survey in-house, and Qualtrics facilitated the multiple distribution modes. As Ron mentioned, we couldn't mail out anything because our National Processing Center was shut down. So instead, we used email and texting invitations for people to take this online survey. And to do that, we used a new resource that we had within the Census Bureau that includes email addresses and cell phone numbers that are associated with addresses. And we matched that to our master address file, and we took our sample from that. As Ron said, we moved really quickly. We started a conversation on March 23rd, talking about what we could do to get data out quickly. We realized very quickly that our existing data collection instruments wouldn't be good for this, so we created a completely new survey. We went into the field on April 23rd of 2020. We put out our first data results on May 20th of 2020, and we've had several phases, as you can see here. We're currently in phase 3.1, which started on April 14th and will go through July 14th. We're currently trying to figure out what the future of the household pulse will look like. But as Ron said, to make this happen, we obviously worked with a lot of other federal agencies listed here. And of course, we needed the Office of Management and Budget to help us get that emergency clearance for the first phase. Next slide. So as you can see, we've added content as we've moved through the phases. So the phase 1 content is shown here in blue or black, phase 2 and 3 in red, and phase 3.1 in green. We asked questions about basic demographics, so age, sex, race, Hispanic origin, marital status, and educational attainment. We added in disability status and armed forces status. Of course, we had a series of questions about employment, commuting and telework, and things like that. We also had a series of questions around food security and whether people had access to free meals and if they were getting SNAP receipt. We had some questions on program use for Social Security and unemployment. We had a series of questions on health, particularly mental health and mental health services use. We had a question on health insurance and access and delays to healthcare. I don't know if you remember, but a lot of doctors' offices were not taking patients unless there was a real emergency last spring. We added questions on vaccination receipt and on about people's intentions to get a vaccine, and also on COVID diagnosis. We have a series of questions on housing, and we've added in eviction and foreclosure expectation. And of course, we have a series of questions on how children were receiving their education. One of the big impacts of the pandemic was how kids were getting their education. Next. I'm just going to show one graph, and this has been in the news recently. This is showing people not working because of childcare arrangements for adults who are not retired or out of the labor force. The top two lines represent women aged 25 to 44 in the blue, and then the teal or green is women aged 18 to 64. And then the bottom two lines are for men. You can see that over the course of the pandemic that women have been much more impacted and out and not working because of childcare arrangements than men have been. Next slide. We As I said, this was an experimental data product, so it's on our experimental data products page. We have a website that has data tables, public use files, interactive tool that we created, and now we have a COVID-19 vaccination tracker. Next slide. As Ron said, when the pandemic hit, not only did we realize that people needed data quickly, they also needed data going down to low levels of geography. So we came up with what we're calling community resilience estimates. And this is a measure of the capacity of individuals and households within a community to absorb the external stresses of the impacts of a disaster. We modeled data from the American Community Survey, our Population Estimates Program, and the National Health Interview Survey to create a small area risk index of the vulnerability of the population during the pandemic. Next slide. So there's several individual risk factors, whether you're age 65 and older, if you're in a low income household, if you're living alone, if you live in a household with a communication barrier, if you have a disability. And then we had some health factor risks from NHIS around respiratory disease, heart disease, and diabetes. Next slide. The result is we have a track level estimate of the number of individuals by the number of risk factors, and they're categorized into 3 groups. If you have 0 flagged risk factors, you're low risk. 1 to 2 flagged risk factors is a medium risk, and 3 or more risk factors is a high risk. So the most vulnerable of the vulnerable. Next slide. This again is an experimental data product, and we created a dashboard that allows you to really zoom in. You can pick a thematic map, a predominant risk map, and you can zoom into the track level and see how many people are living with the different risk factors of low, no risk, low risk, and high risk. So I encourage you, I know that Andy Haight talked a bit about this yesterday, but if you haven't looked at this dashboard, it really is interesting, and many states are now using these data to help them manage their vaccinations rollout. Next slide. And finally, I want to end with the COVID hub that Ron mentioned, and I know there was a session on it yesterday. Of course, we put this up together quickly and put in data from the American Community Survey and from our economic side of the house data. But as we've started these new data collections, we've also added them. So we have the community resilience estimates here. Both the Household Pulse Survey and the Business Pulse Survey are accessible through this hub. And it's really just a wonderful resource. It makes it really easy for people to see data about their community. And of course, having the ACS data in there is great. Okay, and that is, I think, the end of my presentation. So thank you, and I look forward to hearing your comments and questions.
Thank you very much, Tori. And while we're waiting for the next presentation to come up, and before I introduce our next speaker, I want to remind all of the attendees to please post your questions in the live Q&A box that's on the right-hand side of your screen. Please don't put them in the chat. It will be very confusing to try to keep things, track of things in both places. So please post questions in the Q&A box. And as a reminder, any representatives from media organizations, we would appreciate it if you would include your name and your media organization when you post a question. That will be helpful to our panelists when they're responding. Okay, so our final speaker this morning is Donna Daly, who is Chief of the American Community Survey Office at the Census Bureau. And she will be providing some very important ACS program updates. So Donna, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Linda. And I'd also like to thank Ron and Tori for spending some time with us this morning as well. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference as well. So next screen. So my outline, 2020 was a very challenging year for all of us, obviously. And I'm going to share some of the impacts of COVID-19 on the ACS operations. I'm also going to share some information about our research initiatives that we have going on right now. and some information about our ACS data releases, as well as some data user resources that I hope you take away with you and begin to use. We put lots of work into our user resources for you. Next slide. So I want to level set the stage here by giving you a little bit of information about what the ACS data collection process looks pre-COVID. So as most of you are very well aware, it's a data collection operation. We use the 3 modes over a 3-month period. The first set of those modes is a self-response with the internet and also the mailings, and then our non-response follow-up using our computer-assisted personal interviewing, or what we refer to as CAPI. Next slide. So the ACS uses these 12 monthly independent samples, and we use data collection for each of the samples spans 3 months, with mail and internet returns accepted during the entire period, as shown on this slide. The process operates in continuously overlapping panels so that during any given month, we have data collection activities occurring for 3 separate monthly panels. 2 samples are in the mail and internet phase, and 1 is in the personal visit non-response follow-up phase. So data collection includes multiple modes, including internet, mail, telephone, and personal visit. And for most of the housing units, the first phase includes a mailed request to respond online, followed later by an option to complete a paper questionnaire and return it by mail. And if no response is received by either mail or internet, or if the household refuses to participate, the address may be selected for personal visit during our non-response follow-up. Next slide. So as you can imagine, we had to make multiple data collection modifications due to the pandemic. So while households could still self-respond online or by mail while we had stay-at-home orders, such restrictions limited our ability to mail questionnaires and invitations to participate. So we rely on our National Processing Center in Indiana to print, assemble, mail out survey invitations. They also capture the data from completed forms and provide telephone assistance for respondents. And most of the work that they do cannot be done virtually. So the local stay-at-home orders and the need for social distancing impacted our work at NPC greatly. So in mid-March through June of 2020, we temporarily stopped mailing invitations, questionnaires, and reminders. However, any household that had already received an invitation could continue to respond online with no disruption, because our online instrument never had any downtime. We also temporarily stopped processing paper questionnaires that the households had returned by mail. So we stored these questionnaires in our secure facility at NPC until our staff could return to scan and process the information. We ultimately canceled the mail outs for the April, May, and June panels for 2020. So in early June of 2020, the staff began to very gradually return to NPC. We were still limited, though, by the social distancing requirements and staff shortages, but we were able to resume mailing survey materials using a revised strategy. So what that meant was that starting in July, we began to send 2 out of our normal 5 mailing packages. And that included an invitation letter to respond online and either a questionnaire or a reminder. And to mitigate the risk of limiting the number of mailings that we were able to provide, we prioritized sending the paper questionnaire to our lower responding geographies. And then we were able to increase that. We went from 2 to 3 mailing packages in October of 2020, where we were including the invitation to respond online, the questionnaire, and a reminder. And we continued with this strategy until we were finally able to return to our standard 5 mail out strategy in April, just last month, in 2021. So that's for mail. And then now let's switch to the non-response follow-up, and well, for the in-person. So the housing unit non-response follow-up, we temporarily increased our workloads to account for the suspension of mail outs. And thankfully, the field representatives and our field staff already have the ability to do telephone interviews for the CAPI non-response follow-up. So for those in the workload, in that increased workload or the entire workload, generally speaking, if we had a phone number, we switched to 100% telephone interviewing from April through June of 2020. The regional offices, in order to encourage the telephone interviewing, they came up with a new letter called the Please Call Me letter, and they mailed these letters to the entire workload to encourage respondents to call their Census Bureau field rep that would have come to their door. And the letters included all the information that the respondent needed to also either call the FR or to respond online. So it had all of the login information for the online as well. And then I also wanted to share that in July, we were able to resume some personal visits for some areas of the country, but in September 2020, for most all of the areas were now without stay-at-home orders. So we were able to continue our in-person interviewing. For group quarters was a little bit different because of the access issues that we had accessing multiple different types of living situations like nursing homes and college dorms and prisons. We were essentially suspended the interviewing from April through June of 2020 for group quarters. And we were able to start gradually beginning telephone interviewing starting in July of 2020. And at the moment, we're exploring using admin records for some portions of the group quarter sample. Next slide. So the next slide, I want to show you some things that we're considering for the 2020 ACS data products. So the 2020 ACS estimation methodology is going to be different because of the impact of COVID on our data collection operations. So we're taking things into consideration like the underreporting of the vacant housing units while CAPI was limited. The data collection methods were varied during the peak pandemic months. So the weighting has to adapt to the varying survey designs. And then the lack of access to certain group quarters facilities. So the weighting was designed to fit our standard model of self-response and CAPI, but we will have to adjust this, like I mentioned, due to the lack of the mailings, the phone-only CAPI, et cetera. So we're looking into what we need to do to address these issues. Because we were able to adapt to the challenges of the pandemic, we still managed to collect about 2/3 of the responses in 2020 that we had in 2019. We will release 2020 ACS data products, and we will document operational changes and their impacts and effects when we release the ACS estimate starting in September. So, and I also wanted to put in a plug for tomorrow's plenary session. Mark Asiala, the chief of our ACS statistical design area, is presenting at tomorrow's plenary session on the 2020 ACS data products. Next slide. Okay, so now I want to share a little bit about our research initiatives and our roadmap to our research program we call Agility in Action. So we continuously are conducting research to improve the quality of the experience of the people who are in our survey, the survey itself, and the data that we collect. So our current research addresses exploring alternate data sources through the use of admin records, improving the survey design through our upcoming content tests, which I'll speak about in a minute, understanding what it's like for the people to take the survey by conducting one-on-one cognitive testing or interviews with individuals, ensuring quality data collection for people who live in group quarters, and finding the best ways to communicate to the public about the ACS. Next slide. So we have made a lot of progress towards our goal of using admin records in the ACS, and did I skip a slide? No, I didn't. Okay, so to account for the suspension of in-person interviews due to COVID, we're using auxiliary data to predict housing unit status and improve our vacancy rates. And we're also using data from the Bureau of Prisons as an alternate data collection method for our GQ sample. We are also continuing research initiatives for using auxiliary data to impute for missing demographic response data. And we're looking at property tax and sales data to improve the quality of housing characteristics. And we're also looking at income data, income tax data for statistical modeling to improve the quality of the income data. And we are always continuously working on our data sharing agreements with others to acquire more auxiliary data. Next slide. Okay, so the 2022 content test. So adding a question or making a change on the American Community Survey involves extensive testing, review, and evaluation. And we take about 5 years. It goes over a 5-year period. This ensures the change is necessary, there is a legal, regulatory, or programmatic justification, and the change will produce quality, useful information for the nation. We're currently planning and working on our next content test. Our cognitive testing, we began that last year in 2020, and our field test is scheduled for 2022. It includes 11 topics, 8 of which are existing topics: the household roster, educational attainment, health insurance coverage, disability, means of transportation to work, income, home heating fuel, and homeowners association or condo fees. And then we have 3 potential new topics, which are sewer, electric vehicles, and solar panels. And the results from this test are scheduled to be implemented in the 2025 production ACS. Okay, next slide. So disclosure avoidance modernization, as this is a hot topic this week, and that is one of our research initiatives. And I want to share with you guys that at the Census Bureau, we take our oath to protect respondent data very seriously. As you know, the Census Bureau has been working to modernize and strengthen the way we protect data, and that work will also extend to the ACS. We do not plan to implement formal privacy for the full suite of ACS data products before 2025. However, the ACS program will continue to strengthen its existing privacy protections when needed to address privacy risks as they emerge. Our goal throughout this process is to maintain the utility of the ACS while remaining committed to our legal obligations to protect confidentiality. We will engage with the data user community to understand the effect of these methods on data accuracy. And I also wanted to share that the Census Bureau is funding collaboration opportunities with external researchers on the issue of formal privacy for sample surveys, including the ACS. And a key deliverable of such collaboration efforts will be to establish effective data user engagement. And another plug for tomorrow's plenary session is that Rolanda Rodriguez, the chief of the Research and Applications Group in our Center for Enterprise Dissemination, is presenting this topic at tomorrow's plenary session. Next slide. Okay, so the data release schedule. So I want to share with you guys, first of all, that we're on track and on schedule for the data releases for 2020. And as you can see on this slide, and I will step you through it, our 1-year data products they're scheduled to be released starting in September. September 23rd is our 1-year data products. On October 14th is our 1-year PUMS file and supplemental estimates. And on December 9th, we are releasing our 5-year data products. And on January 13th of 2022, we are releasing our 5-year PUMS and our variance replicate estimates. And so far we are on track and on schedule for that. Next slide. So I want to share a little bit more about how we plan to communicate. We are committed to providing quality data, and we know how important these data are to your work. And because 2020 was such a very unique and challenging year, we want to be transparent and let you know how we were impacted by the pandemic and how we adapted to produce the 2020 ACS data. So we're going to do this by releasing a series of blogs leading up to and through our 2020 release season. These blogs will share information about the challenges we experience with data collection, what we are considering with regard to weighting and estimation in order to produce the 2020 estimates, and how data quality and data products may be impacted. Next slide. And now I'm going to share, the next couple of slides are about data user resources, and these are real important to everybody, hopefully at the conference. So supporting the data users is super important to the ACS program. So we provide a variety of ways to outreach and support your efforts, including educational materials, flyers, and training materials, which can be accessed through the URL at the bottom of this slide. We promote the survey and engage with the data users by participating in conference exhibits, holding webinars, and giving presentations. We answer data user questions through either the phone, email, or ask.census.gov. We also encourage the users to engage with each other through our ACS Data Users Group. And then, of course, we host this biennial ACS Data Users Conference every other year. So we're glad to have you with us this week. Next slide. So another example of some data user resources is our Data User Handbook series. So these handbooks provide information tailored to specific data user audiences or to the use of a specific tool. So we recently revised the entire series of 14 handbooks in partnership with PRB to make them current, especially by demonstrating how to access the data through our new platform, data.census.gov. We also added case studies demonstrating real-life examples of ACS data users, and you can view or download the PDFs on our website or the URL that's on the bottom of the screen. And as Tori and Ron both mentioned, our COVID-19 Data Hub, which showcases the ACS data plus tons of other Census Bureau data, was developed directly in support of data users as they responded to the pandemic. Next slide. And then another way we support data users is through our data users group and online community. And I know that many of you are already members, but if you aren't, I encourage you to join. The purpose of the users group is to improve the understanding and the value and utility of the ACS, as well as to promote information sharing among data users. The users group includes a group website and online community with over 3,000 members. And it includes information like previous conference presentations and archived webinars. It's also a site where members can share messages, materials, and announcements. And the Census Bureau staff are also members, and we share program updates here. And membership is free and open to anyone interested. And to learn more, there's another URL at the bottom of the screen. Okay, so data dissemination services. So since this is a virtual conference, we know that we are reaching a much more geographically diverse group than we have before, which is great. But we want you to know about our data dissemination specialists who are located in your region and can provide you with assistance about Census Bureau data. These specialists usually provide help in English, but sometimes in other languages, depending on the needs of the community. Whether conducting one-on-one webinars with business startups or conducting large-scale presentations at universities, these specialists strive to put the public in touch with the data that they need. So our DDSs provide a wide variety of assistance for free. If you're interested in a specific type of training or presentation, please reach out to the specialist by calling and looking at the contact information on this screen. And one thing to note, though, is that the in-person data services are currently suspended due to the COVID restrictions. So you do want to keep that in mind when you contact them. Next slide. Let's see, tell us your stories. So we love to hear all the stories that you have on how you or your organization use ACS data to either make an important decision or help your community or expand a business. We encourage you to visit the link at the bottom of the slide to share your story and also to explore how other data users are using ACS in creative ways. So this is a great way to promote the importance of the ACS. Next slide. And finally, I want to encourage you all to connect with us directly. You can sign up and manage alerts with our GovDelivery. You can also go to the GovDelivery if you want the slides from this presentation or any other presentations that we provide. GovDelivery will send out broadcast messages when materials are available. You can also visit our website or connect on the various social media platforms using the hashtag ACS Data. We also have an email to help that helps support data users who may have questions. And if you are using the ACS estimates, we encourage you to please source the Census Bureau American Community Survey as to where you receive the data. It helps people know that the information they're using is powered by the American Community Survey. And with that, I would like to say thank you very much for attending the conference, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the week. And I will turn it back over to Linda.
Great. Thank you so much, Donna. So we're going to turn to the live Q&A. So I'm going to ask the panelists to please turn their cameras back on, and attendees, please continue to post your questions in the Q&A box, and we will get to as many of them as we can. I've received a couple of questions, and so rather than posting them and making our panelists answer them, for those of you who joined late, the answer is yes, this session is being recorded, and the recording will be available to conference registrants after this session is over. And yes, the presentation slides from this morning will be available. We will be posting them on the session page for this session later this afternoon, and they will also be posted in the ACS online community. All right, so now I am going to turn to questions. So the first question is for you, Ron, and it's a very technical question. It says, you use SMS text messages since this is a federal data collection effort, right? So this is referring, I presume, to the Household Pulse Survey. And it says TCPA prohibits the use of cold text messages in data collection without prior consent, but collection for the federal programs are exempt.
So I believe that's correct. I'll turn it over to Tori, who has the answer. But yeah, this has been a conversation with attorneys and whatnot. So we believe we've checked all the boxes, and really, without being able to use texts, it would have been very difficult to get the level of response that we did. So Tori, you want to add anything to that?
No, that was perfect, Ron. You're right.
Okay. Okay, so our next question is, I missed the release date for the redistricting product. Can you please repeat? Also, are there any potential release dates for the DHC and the detailed DHC?
So I'll take that, Linda. The release date for the redistricting data product is August 16th in the legacy format. And then we will release it in an easy to use format by September 30th of 2021. We do not yet have any release dates for the other data products. We're still working on that.
Okay. The next question is, will the disclosure avoidance criteria used for the DHC file need to be revisited for the more detailed files to be released about racial, ethnic, and tribal groups? And this is
we're actually
from Cliff Cook.
Okay, thank you for that question. We're actually using a slightly different disclosure avoidance system for the detailed DHC. It's a little more technical than I want to get into right now, but we're using differential privacy, but applying it in a different way than we are for the DHC. So we think we're in good shape for that.
Okay. The next question is, when will the SF1 file be available? This comes from Ian Keith at FHFA.
It's not the SF1 anymore. It's the DHC, the demographic and housing characteristics, and we do not have a date yet. We, of course, are working to get it out as quickly as we can after the redistricting data, but we have work to do on the disclosure avoidance system.
Okay, thanks, Tori. And the next question is, one question that came up in a roundtable yesterday was the level of detail for different racial and ethnic groups. What can you tell us about the detailed DHC, its release date, and geographic levels for which it will be available?
So a lot of questions about the detailed DHC, which of course is everyone's favorite product. It will vary. The geography will vary depending on the group size, and the details that we put out will also vary depending on the group size. So if it's a very small, American Indian or Alaskan Native tribe, they may not get as much detail as, the number, the Chinese population. So it really depends. We have a system in place where we are kind of tuning it so that if the population size is really small, we'll put out the data that we think are high quality.
Okay. The next question is back to 2020 census, and it is pertaining to GQ for college dorms. Can you clarify the process used to quantify the empty dorm facilities? Most universities could not provide much in the way of admin data due to FERPA. How was the demographic data captured and reconciled?
So I'll take a start, and then maybe Tori wants to add in. So in many cases, we actually recontacted GQs, not just universities, but also prisons and other areas that had some fluidity in their population during COVID. And so I think we're pretty confident that we were able to go back and get what we needed. But we also used what we call our GQ Advance operation, which got some basic information, including pop counts, before the pandemic hit. So that was actually a pretty good source of information for us. Tori, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that covers it. Thanks, Rob.
Okay. Our next question is there any possibility that the legacy file will differ? So this is for PL 94, that the legacy file will differ from the September 30 release. For example, what would happen if DAS is affected by Alabama's court case after the legacy release, but before the September 30th release?
I was going to take that one until they mentioned the Alabama case. Ron, do you want to take it?
So I would just say that right now we plan that those two products would be the same. And if there's some legal order, that we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is, I am a new user to the ACS Census group. Tim Morales, could you please explain what is disclosure avoidance and why I consistently hear more regarding this topic? Thank you.
Tori, do you want to take that?
Sure. So we at the Census Bureau, as Donna said, Title 13 prohibits us from releasing any information that would enable somebody to identify one of our respondents. And so we use disclosure avoidance to kind of mask that, so you can't figure out that that was Tori Velkoff in the census. And it's simply a technique that we've used over the course of decades. We are just switching now to a new technique which has more privacy protection, guaranteed privacy protection than the system we used in the past.
Okay. Then there's a question, will there be a 2020 census PUMS file?
At the moment, we're planning to have one.
Okay. The next question is, where can we find all the upcoming release dates?
Is that for Donna? ACS date release dates?
I think it's for all of them. It's not specified. So maybe you each want to answer one for ACS and one for Decennial.
Right. So our data products are, the release schedule is listed on our website, the www.census.gov/ACS, and you'll find our data release dates that I shared on my slide deck. But it'll, again, also be provided in the slide deck if you want to look at the presentation as well.
And as I said in my presentation, redistricting will come out on August 16th in the legacy format and in an easy to use format by September 30th. We do not yet have release dates for the other data products, but when we do, we will post them on our website.
Thank you. So our next question is from NPR reporter Hanzila Wang. Since the 2019 training conference for the Census Information Centers, or CIC network, what kind of outreach to the CIC network has the Census Bureau done to solicit feedback on its differential privacy implementation?
So we have ongoing conversations with a number of groups through different form. I'm not familiar with the CIC outreach in particular. Tori, or?
I'm not familiar with that either, but we are reaching out to various stakeholders and we continue to do that. So if the CIC is interested, I'm sure that we could schedule a session with them.
Okay. The next question is from Zachary Fussfeld, and he asks, are you concerned about significant differential non-response as a result of the increased usage of internet/online tools?
So, Mark Asiel, I can address that question. With the design for the ACS, we sort of properly account for, the different modes of data collection that we use, and the fact that you will have, a certain portion will respond via the internet or the mail or our non-response follow-up operation. So that's all taken into an account. It's still weighted in at its appropriate level. So it's not just that if more people respond in one mode, that it will cause a dramatic shift in our tabular products. Where we actually have more concern is if something disrupts the non-response follow-up, and I'll get more into that in my plenary talk tomorrow. That's where we tend to have issues. If something disrupts that final mode of data collection, that's where the greatest potential for non-response bias items can come in. But again, I'll talk about this more detail tomorrow.
Thank you, Mark. So the next question, which you've already answered, but just for clarification, was the new apportionment based on data that had noise introduced into it?
No, so there's no noise introduced into the apportionment counts. They are as enumerated.
And the next question is, was the difference between the census data and the estimates in Arizona due to undercounting?
So it's not clear. Arizona came in low in 2010 as well compared to our population estimates. So when we do this comparison to the population estimates, realizing that neither the census nor the population estimates are the truth, we don't know that yet. We have to do more examining. When we get the data by race and Hispanic origin and age and sex, we'll be able to compare that. And also we have a post-enumeration survey that will provide the net undercounts. So that will come out later in, I think, 22. Is that right, Ron?
I think either towards the end of this year or early next year is my understanding. So.
Okay, so now we'll switch gears a little bit, and the next question comes from Carol Cunningham, and it is, I would love to be able to track the effects of COVID to multicultural communities. What are the best areas to utilize for conducting in-depth analyses?
Well, I would suggest going and looking at our community resilience estimates. That will give you a start. And then I think you can use the ACS data as well. The data that we're collecting in the household pulse survey do not have, while we collect it for the major race and race groups and Hispanic origin, we don't have detailed race and Hispanic origin. So I would suggest starting with the community resilience estimates, which you can get at our COVID hub.
The next question does the Census Bureau plan to provide guidance such as FAQs or videos to help users with the legacy file redistricting data release as the National Advisory Committee requested?
Do you know the answer, Ron?
So I believe we are doing some work with that, and also there's some private sector organizations that have worked with the states in the past that are also assisting several of the states. So my understanding, talking with our redistricting office, is that there's plenty of support for this.
Michael, did you want to add something?
Well, this is Michael Cook, PIO. Just wanted to confirm that the Communications Directorate is currently taking a look at not just what type of materials to produce, but taking in and taking a swath or a grand view of all the comments that we've received from our stakeholders, partners, advocacy groups, to ensure that the communications that we do provide and those data tools, those data products that actually bolster and explain and provide teachable moments to the public are things that will hit the mark. So yes, it is our intent to ensure that we do our due diligence as good stewards of taxpayers' dollars and create communications products that clearly describe and explain the material that will be released, and in particular talking about the legacy format of the redistricting data.
Thank you. The next question is, are final table shells available for the 2020 census data products? And if not, when will they be available?
For the 2020 data products or for the ACS?
For the 2020 data products.
Okay. I believe, I'm not certain. I should know the answer to this. I know that we have a set of data tables, and I think they're near final, but we'll get back with an answer to that question.
Okay. Is there anybody else, Tori, who's listening in who might want to provide an answer to that?
This is Michael again. If you're talking about, in particular, the table shells surrounding PL 94-171, the vintage, if you take a look at the Redistricting Data Office website, currently within the technical documentation that's posted there, there's information that describes what those what that data will look like. So it gives you an indication of the file format for that set of data, the legacy data.
Okay, thank you. The next question, we'll switch back to differential privacy. And so this may be one that will be better addressed after Rolando's presentation tomorrow. But the question is, can you provide more context for the fitness for use statistics that will contextualize differential privacy error?
So I'll take a crack at it, but I think you're right that probably they should wait until tomorrow's plenary session if they're talking about the ACS. When we're talking about the census, we have a series of metrics that we put out when we release any of those PPMFs that I talked about in my talk. So that's where we're running the 2010 census through the disclosure avoidance system and putting out the data for people to look at and compare back to the 2010 data. And we have a set of metrics that go with that. So I encourage you to go and look at the PPMF releases and also the metrics that accompany those releases.
Thanks, Tori. And the next question is, will the PL data be directly accessible from the Census Bureau or through the state data centers?
I assume it's through the Census Bureau. Michael?
Yeah, that's true. We will have and be posting publicly that information for people to access. As you know from the releases that we posted thus far, there is a blog that states specifically the legacy format will be available via our FTP website, and then the other version, which will be posted by September 30th, which everyone has already discussed, will be available on a much easier to access format. But yes, all that stuff will be posted on our website. And we will post releases to actually tell you exactly where to go get it. So we'll be transparent in everything that we do.
Thank you. The next question is, I think, for you, Donna, and it is, can you speak more about how you're using the income tax data to improve income-related estimates?
Okay, so I know that at this point that it is, they're using it for modeling, and they're using it for input into the research and some of the modeling that they're doing at the moment.
Okay. We have another question from, all right, hold on. Sorry, I have to approve this before I can display it. Okay, so this is a second question from Hansi from NPR. And his question is it possible that the PL94-171 data in the legacy format will be released before August 16th?
So I don't think so. I mean, that's the date we're shooting for. And so, you know, it won't be released after, you know, technically possible that it could be released before, but, you know, that's the date we're shooting for. And, you know, there's not just getting the data ready, but then there's all the rollout stuff that needs to accompany that. So I would look for it on the 16th.
Okay. And the next question is, will the 2022 content test revisit recommendations from those in 2017?
I don't know about revisiting recommendations, but I do know that some of the topics that we are covering, we are going to look at again, some health insurance coverage, and also the rostering that that we were doing. We're looking at the coverage for the household roster. So I know that there's an advocacy for the undercount of young children. So we are also looking into trying to minimize that as well in some of the content. So I don't know specifically what recommendations they're talking about, but we do check back in on things periodically as we go through.
And the next question is there any way to tell which 2020 census blocks are GQ blocks versus general tabulation blocks?
I'm not sure I understand the question, Ron.
So we don't have anyone from geography on. So I would punt on that question. We'll try to get back to folks on that.
Okay, and I will just recommend to whoever asked this question that there is a roundtable session, I believe, coming up this afternoon with geography folks, unless it was, oh, it was yesterday. Okay, never mind. So we will try to get back to you. I don't have a name for that question. So whoever posed that, if you want to post in the chat your name, they will be able to get back to you. The next question is, the ACS has so much great data, but sometimes I get lost trying to find the right data to use or to know if it even exists. Is there a place like a sitemap that lists or explains all the available data sets?
Okay, so what I would encourage you to do is to contact our outreach and education folks on our website. And we have lots of data user resources, and we've got lots of experts in that area that can kind of talk it through with you to figure out exactly what data you need. We have tons of resources on how to determine what you need and what data you need to go to find it. And one resource is those handbooks that I mentioned earlier. They're up on our website as well. So if you visit census.gov/ACS, you will, I think, find lots of information. And I have tons of folks here from the user an outreach branch. So if one of them could perhaps throw in the chat on the attendee chat that's happening, if you guys could throw in your contact information, that would be great.
Okay. And so the next question is a follow-up, and it is to follow up on the possible undercount in Arizona. When or how will we know if specific areas had a greater undercount, such as the Navajo Nation? What questions do you recommend the redistricting commission ask about the population count in Arizona?
As I said, when we put out our post-enumeration survey, I think it goes down just to the state level, but it will then determine if there was really an undercount. Comparing to the population estimates is not confirmation that there was an undercount. It's just confirmation that there was a difference between our population estimate, which was based on the 2010 census, and we add in births and subtract out deaths and add in an estimate of net international migration and net domestic migration. So there's lots of reasons there could be error in those population estimates. So there's not yet, I wouldn't say there's a undercount in Arizona yet.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Tori. And the next question is, and you've already answered this, but just to make sure everyone's clear, will there be noise injected in the DHA and the well, it's actually DHC. It should be the DHC and detailed DHC products.
Yes, we will be using differential privacy on both the detailed, both the demographic and housing characteristics file and the detailed demographic and housing characteristics file.
Okay, so I'm checking for any other questions. We have just a few minutes left. So this question is about the internet access for the ACS. Let me get it so I can display it for the attendees here. Okay, so the question is, one question on the ACS that gets used a lot is the one on internet access. The way the question is worded, there is no option for fixed wireless broadband for people to select, but there is a commonly used, but this is a commonly used technology. Any plans to revisit the question?
So for the internet technology, I know that we work with the FCC and with the Seaside sponsors, if you will, for those questions. And I know that in the past that we have, with that the fast pace of the change in technology, that we have gone in and we have tweaked the wording for the content on some of those questions in the past. So if there is something out there that that our computer and internet usage folks over in Seaside and the FCC agree is something that we need to change more rapidly than in a content test, then we can work with them. So I can't guarantee you that we will make that change, within the next couple of months or whatever, but I will definitely take it back to my team and we will look into that.
Great, thank you, Donna.
Sure.
So we have just about 2 minutes left. So I want to ask this question because I think it's a great question. It reflects sentiment of many people participating. And the question is, where do we get the I Heart Census Data stickers? So I think they're looking at your background, Ron, and
yeah,
where they can get one to.
Well, I will ask. Well, so we actually have stickers. So too bad we're not in person. We could give you stickers, but I don't know, Michael, is there a way we can, maybe we don't want people using our backgrounds, but I'm sure that there's probably a way to make the stuff available somehow. So isn't it cool though?
It is a great background. It is a very cool background.
Okay, so that's all the time we have for this session today. I want to thank all three of our speakers, Dr. Jarman, Dr. Velkoff, and Donna Daly, for taking time out of their very busy schedules to join us today and to provide these important updates about the ACS program and about 2020 Census data products and some really exciting new innovative products that the Census Bureau has been developing. So we have a 30-minute break now for lunch, and then our sessions will resume at 1 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time this afternoon. So I want to thank all of the participants also for joining us, and we hope you have a great rest of your conference. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.